In 1933, a Norwegian philosopher wrote an essay that remains too disturbing to be widely taught. Peter Wessel Zapffe, a mountaineer, a lawyer, a philosopher who spent his life climbing peaks and staring into abysses. And what he discovered about human consciousness makes Schopenhauer look optimistic. Zapffe asked a question no one wanted to answer. Why are humans the only species that commits suicide? Why are we the only creatures who experience existential despair? Why does consciousness, the thing we celebrate as our greatest achievement, create such profound suffering that some people choose death over continuing to experience it? His answer is brutal. Consciousness is a biological mistake, an evolutionary overshoot. Humanity developed a level of awareness that exceeds what's necessary for survival, and this excess awareness creates a fundamental problem. We can see too much, understand too much, recognize truths about existence that make continuing to exist unbearable. We see that life has no inherent meaning, that death is final and absolute, that the universe is indifferent to our suffering, that all our striving leads nowhere, that everything we build will crumble, that everyone we love will die, that we ourselves will die and be forgotten. These aren't philosophical abstractions. They're direct perceptions available to anyone who looks clearly at reality, and they're incompatible with the biological imperative to survive and reproduce. So what does humanity do? According to Zapffe, we employ 4 psychological mechanisms to suppress this awareness. 4 lies we tell ourselves. 4 strategies to avoid seeing what we actually see. He calls them isolation, anchoring, distraction, and sublimation. And every human uses all 4, constantly, unconsciously, to remain functional, to avoid the full confrontation with existence that would make survival impossible. This isn't theory. This is description. Zapffe is showing you the machinery already operating in your mind, the defenses you're using right now, the lies sustaining your ability to continue living. And once you see them clearly, once you understand how they work, you can't stop seeing them everywhere. In yourself, in others, in entire civilizations built on collective denial. Before we examine each mechanism, understand what you're about to learn. This isn't philosophy that makes life better. It's philosophy that reveals the cost of continuing, the price of sanity in a universe that drives you mad if you look at it honestly. If you're ready to see the machinery of your own self-deception, if you want to understand how you survive awareness that should destroy you, then subscribe to the Hidden Codex. Turn on notifications, because Zapffe's vision is darker than almost anything in philosophy, not because he's exaggerating, but because he's describing exactly what's happening right now in your mind. As you try not to think about what you already know, let's begin. Peter Wessel Zapffe was born in 1899 in Tromsø, Norway, far north. Land of midnight sun and polar night, extremes of light and darkness. He studied law, became a lawyer, but his passion was mountaineering. He spent his life climbing, testing himself against nature, finding something in the heights, some clarity, some confrontation with existence stripped of social pretense. Mountains don't lie, don't pretend, don't offer comfortable stories. They just are. Indifferent, dangerous, beautiful in their absolute lack of care whether you live or die. And Zapffe loved them for this honesty, this refusal to accommodate human need for meaning. He married young. His wife Berit shared his philosophy. They made a mutual decision. No children, not because they couldn't afford them, not because of career concerns, but because they believed bringing new consciousness into existence was cruel, was inflicting existence on someone who never asked for it. who would inevitably suffer the burden of awareness, who would need to employ the same defense mechanisms to survive seeing what cannot be unseen. This wasn't depression, wasn't mental illness, was philosophical consistency. If consciousness is tragic, if awareness creates suffering, if existence requires constant psychological defense against its own reality, then the ethical choice is not to perpetuate it, not to create new sufferers, not to pass the burden forward. In 1933, he published his essay, The Last Messiah, a strange title for a strange work, part philosophy, part poetry, part prophecy. It asks, what if humanity fully awakened? What if we collectively dropped the defense mechanisms and saw reality as it actually is? What would happen? Zapffe's answer: extinction, not through violence, through the simple recognition that continuing is pointless, that existence doesn't justify its own continuation, that the honest response to reality is refusal. This is the messianic message. Not salvation, not transcendence, but the permission to stop, to recognize that you don't have to continue, that existence is optional, that the door is always open, and that walking through it isn't failure, it's clarity. But most people never reach this clarity, because the defense mechanisms work. They're powerful, automatic, deeply embedded. You're using them right now without knowing it. So let's examine them. Let's see the machinery. Let's understand how you survive what should destroy you. The first mechanism is isolation. This is the simplest defense. You simply don't think about disturbing truths. You isolate them, quarantine them, keep them out of consciousness. Someone mentions death. You change the subject. Acknowledge it briefly, then move on. Never dwell. Never examine deeply. Never let the full reality of mortality penetrate your awareness and stay there. You know you're going to die, intellectually, abstractly, but you don't feel it. Don't live in that awareness. Don't let it shape your moment-to-moment experience. You isolate it. Keep it at a distance. Allow it into consciousness only in controlled doses. Brief acknowledgments followed by immediate suppression. This happens with all unbearable truths. The meaninglessness of existence. You know nothing you do matters cosmically, but you don't think about it. You isolate this knowledge. Keep it from affecting your daily choices. You pursue goals as if they matter. Make plans as if the future is real and significant. Act as though your actions have weight and consequence, not because you believe this, but because you've isolated the knowledge that it's not true, the indifference of the universe. You know reality doesn't care about you, that your suffering means nothing to the cosmos, that you could die right now and the universe would continue exactly as it was. But you don't live in this awareness. You isolate it. Pretend the universe has some relationship to your existence, some acknowledgement of your presence. You personalize reality, give it intention, make it about you, to avoid feeling the full weight of cosmic indifference, the randomness of outcomes. You know that merit doesn't determine results, that good people suffer and bad people prosper, that justice is a human invention with no cosmic enforcement. But you isolate this. Act as if fairness exists, as if effort correlates with outcome, as if the universe has some mechanism ensuring things work out right. You have to believe this, even knowing it's false, because acknowledging the full randomness would make planning impossible, would reveal that you're just gambling, that your entire life strategy is based on pretending patterns exist where there's only chaos. Isolation is the most fundamental defense, because without it, the other three can't function. You must first not think about something before you can anchor to something else, distract yourself, or sublimate it into meaning. Isolation is the foundation, the first lie. the one that makes all other lies possible. And you're incredibly good at it. You've been practicing since childhood, learning what thoughts to avoid, what questions not to ask, what implications not to follow to their logical conclusions. Your mind has become expert at redirecting attention away from anything too disturbing, too real, too honest. You feel the edge of an unbearable thought approaching, and you smoothly, automatically, unconsciously shift focus. Think about something else. Engage with some distraction. Never let the thought complete. Never examine it fully. This is isolation in action, and it's operating constantly, right now. As you read this, part of your mind trying to avoid the full implications of what's being described. The second mechanism is anchoring. This is where you fix your attention to something. Commit to it. Treat it as if it matters absolutely, as if it provides stable ground in an unstable reality. People anchor to all sorts of things. Career. You make your work your identity, your purpose, your justification for existing. You're not just doing a job. You're fulfilling your potential, contributing, mattering. The work gives you structure, direction, a reason to get up each day. Without it, what would you be? What would you do? The questions are unbearable. So you anchor. Make the work matter. Make it essential. Make it the thing that gives your life meaning, even though you know, if you thought about it, that the work doesn't actually matter. That you could disappear tomorrow and the organization would replace you instantly. That your contribution, while real, is cosmically insignificant. But you don't think about this. You anchor instead. Relationships. You anchor to people. Make them essential. Make them the meaning of your existence. Your spouse, your children, your friends. They become the answer to why continue. You continue for them, because they need you, because you love them, because connection is meaning. And this works. Until you think about it too carefully. Until you recognize that they're as temporary as you are. That they'll die or you'll die, and the connection will sever. That the meaning you found in them is as fragile as they are. That you're anchoring to something impermanent to avoid facing the permanent meaninglessness. But you don't think about this. You anchor. You love. You commit. You make it matter. Ideology. Political, religious, philosophical systems you believe in absolutely. That give you a framework, a narrative, a purpose larger than yourself. You're not just living randomly. You're serving something, fighting for something, part of something meaningful. The ideology tells you what matters, what to pursue, what to avoid. It gives structure to chaos, meaning to randomness, purpose to existence, and you anchor to it. Make it unquestionable. Defend it against criticism. Build your identity around it, because losing it would mean losing your ground, losing your reason for continuing. So you hold it tighter. Make it more rigid. Never examine it too closely. Never ask if it's actually true or just another anchor. Another thing you're using to avoid the abyss. Projects. Things you're building, creating, working toward. You anchor to the future, to the thing that will exist when you complete it. You're writing a book, starting a business, building a house, raising children, working toward retirement. The project becomes the meaning, the justification, the answer to why today matters, because it's bringing you closer to completion, closer to the thing that will somehow make it all worthwhile. And you can't question this. Can't ask what happens after completion, what you'll anchor to when this project is done, because that would reveal the mechanism, would show that you're just using the project to avoid confronting the absence of inherent meaning. So you don't ask. You just anchor, work, strive, move toward the goal. Let it give your days structure and your life direction. Anchoring is more sophisticated than isolation. Isolation is passive, not thinking about something. Anchoring is active, committing to something, treating it as if it matters absolutely. And the tragedy is that the things you anchor to often do matter. In human terms. In relative terms. Your work does help people. Your relationships are genuinely meaningful. Your ideology might be true or at least useful. Your projects do create value, but you've made them more than that. You've made them absolute, cosmic, the foundation of existence itself, because you need them to be that. Need them to bear weight they can't actually bear. Need them to provide meaning that nothing can actually provide. And this works. Until it doesn't. Until the anchor fails. Until you lose the job, or the person, or the faith, or the project. And then you're confronted with what you were avoiding. The groundlessness. The absence of inherent meaning. The recognition that you weren't standing on solid ground. You were just pretending something was solid by committing to it absolutely. The third mechanism is distraction. This is the easiest to see, the most obvious, the one modern society has perfected beyond anything Zapffe could have imagined. Distraction is keeping yourself busy, occupied, engaged with something, anything to avoid silence, avoid stillness, avoid the thoughts that come when you're not distracted. Entertainment, you watch screens, consume content, hours every day, movies, shows, videos, games, immersing yourself in fictional worlds, other people's stories, anything to not be in your own mind, not facing your own existence. The entertainment industry exists because people need distraction, need something to fill the void, need something to occupy awareness so it doesn't turn inward and see what's there. And it works. You can spend entire days, entire lives, distracted, never bored, never still, never alone with yourself, until you are, until the show ends and you're in the dark, and the thoughts come rushing back and you immediately reach for another distraction. Social media, the perfect distraction machine, infinite scroll, infinite content, infinite engagement. You can lose hours without realizing it, numbing yourself, filling your mind with other people's lives, other people's thoughts, other people's drama, never dealing with your own, never sitting with yourself, never confronting the questions that emerge in stillness. The algorithm knows what you need, keeps feeding you, keeps you engaged, keeps you distracted. From what? From the recognition that you're wasting your life consuming content to avoid living, that you're using distraction to fill time until death, that scrolling is easier than thinking, easier than feeling, easier than facing what you're avoiding. Busyness, work, tasks, always something to do, always somewhere to be, schedule packed, calendar full, meetings, errands, obligations. You're productive, you're accomplishing things, you're busy, too busy to think, too busy to feel, too busy to stop and ask what you're busy for, what all this activity is accomplishing, whether any of it matters. You can't ask these questions. You're too busy, and that's the point. Busyness is distraction, filling time, filling consciousness, keeping yourself occupied so you don't have to confront the emptiness underneath the activity. Substances, alcohol, drugs, medication, anything that alters consciousness, makes reality more bearable, takes the edge off, numbs the pain, provides temporary relief from the burden of awareness. You're not escaping, just distracting, interrupting the thoughts, dampening the feelings, creating a chemical buffer between consciousness and reality. And it works. Until it wears off. Until you're sober again, and the thoughts return, and you need another drink, another pill, another hit, another distraction. The substance use isn't the problem. It's the symptom. The evidence that consciousness is unbearable and you need help carrying it. Distraction is everywhere, in everything. Society is organized around providing it, selling it, making it available every moment of every day, because people need it, desperately, can't function without it, would collapse under the weight of undistracted awareness, would see too clearly, feel too directly, understand too completely, would recognize that they're mortal beings in a meaningless universe spending their brief existence filling time until death, and that recognition would make continuation difficult, maybe impossible. So we distract, constantly, compulsively, culturally. We've built an entire civilization on distraction, on keeping people occupied, on ensuring no one has to sit in silence with themselves and confront what's actually happening. The fourth mechanism is sublimation. This is the most sophisticated, the most respected, the most celebrated. Sublimation is taking the anxiety, the despair, the existential horror, and transforming it into something else, something productive, something meaningful. Art. You take your suffering and make it beautiful, your despair and make it profound, your horror at existence and express it in forms others can experience. You're not avoiding the darkness, you're channeling it, giving it shape, making something from it. The artist confronts what others avoid, feels what others suppress, sees what others deny, and transforms it into art. Painting, music, writing, film. The darkness becomes the material. The suffering becomes the source. The unbearable becomes the subject. And somehow, through the alchemy of creation, it becomes bearable. Not because it's less true, but because it's expressed, given form, shared, made into something that has value, even if nothing has inherent value. Philosophy. You take the questions that torture you and examine them systematically. Build systems. Develop arguments. Try to understand. Try to make sense of what doesn't make sense. The philosopher is someone who can't stop thinking about what most people avoid thinking about, who follows thoughts to their logical conclusions even when those conclusions are unbearable, who asks questions that have no comforting answers, and writes it all down, shares it, makes it public, turns private despair into public discourse. And this is sublimation, taking what should destroy you and making it your work, your contribution, your purpose, science. You take the terrifying randomness and try to find patterns, laws, predictability. You study the universe that doesn't care about you and try to understand how it works, why it works, what principles govern it. You can't make it care, can't make it meaningful, but you can understand it. And understanding is a form of control, a way of managing the horror. You're mortal, temporary, insignificant, but you can know things, can discover things, can add to human knowledge, can contribute to the collective understanding, and this matters, not cosmically, but humanly. And that's enough, has to be enough. So you sublimate. Turn existential despair into scientific curiosity. Turn horror at meaninglessness into determination to understand mechanism. Service. You take your own suffering and use it to reduce others' suffering. You can't eliminate suffering, can't make existence not tragic, but you can help, can ease pain, can provide comfort, can make the burden lighter for someone else. You become a doctor, a therapist, a teacher, a caregiver, someone who takes the awareness of universal suffering and responds with compassion, with action, with dedication to making things slightly less terrible, not because it fixes the fundamental problem, but because it's what you can do, the only meaningful response available. So you sublimate, turn your despair outward, make it service, make it care, make it action in the face of meaninglessness. Sublimation is celebrated because it's productive. It creates value, contributes, makes something from nothing, takes the darkness and makes light, or at least makes something, and society respects this, rewards this, encourages this. We want artists who express our shared despair, philosophers who examine our shared confusion, scientists who understand our shared reality, caregivers who ease our shared suffering. They're doing something with the burden, making it useful, productive, valuable. They're not just carrying consciousness. They're making consciousness mean something, even if meaning is invented, even if it's just another defense mechanism, even if they're ultimately doing the same thing as everyone else, just more beautifully, more systematically, more helpfully. Now, here's what Zapffe understood that most people miss. These mechanisms aren't conscious choices. You don't decide to employ them. They're automatic, unconscious, operating constantly without your awareness. You're not deliberately isolating disturbing thoughts. Your mind is doing it automatically. You're not consciously choosing your anchors. You're finding yourself already anchored, already committed, already treating certain things as if they matter absolutely. You're not planning your distractions. You're just distracted, reaching for the phone, turning on the screen, filling the silence, without deciding to, without even noticing you're doing it. And sublimation, when it happens, doesn't feel like a defense mechanism. It feels like calling, like purpose, like the thing you're meant to do. You don't think, I'll transform my existential despair into art. You just feel compelled to create, driven to express, called to serve. The mechanism is invisible to the person using it. This is what makes Zapffe's analysis so disturbing. He's not describing strategies you could choose to stop using. He's describing the structure of functional human consciousness. The only way to remain sane in an insane situation. The only way to continue existing when existence is absurd. You can't stop using these mechanisms, because without them, you'd see reality clearly. And seeing reality clearly makes survival difficult, maybe impossible. You'd see that nothing matters, that all your striving leads nowhere, that death is final, that the universe is indifferent, that meaning is invented, that purpose is pretend, that you're a temporary arrangement of atoms briefly aware of being a temporary arrangement of atoms, and then not aware, forever. And knowing this, really knowing it, living in this awareness constantly without defense, would make getting out of bed difficult, making plans impossible, continuing pointless. Why do anything when nothing matters? Why pursue goals when death negates all achievement? Why love when everyone dies? Why create when everything crumbles? Why continue when you could stop? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're the questions that emerge when the defense mechanisms fail, when isolation breaks down and the thoughts flood in, when anchors fail and you're groundless, when distractions stop working and you're alone with yourself, when sublimation feels futile and even creating meaning feels meaningless. These are the moments of crisis, of breakdown, of dark nights of the soul, when you see what you usually avoid seeing, feel what you usually suppress feeling, know what you usually deny knowing, and the experience is crushing, unbearable, destructive. It's why people can't function during these crises, why depression paralyzes, why existential despair destroys motivation, why confronting meaninglessness leads to questioning whether to continue. The defense mechanisms aren't optional. They're necessary. They're how you survive consciousness that evolved beyond what consciousness can bear. But here's the trap. The mechanisms work by suppressing awareness, by not looking directly at reality, by avoiding, deflecting, transforming what cannot be faced head-on. But you're aware enough to know you're doing this. Meta-aware enough to recognize the mechanisms, to see yourself employing them, to understand that your commitments are anchors, that your busyness is distraction, that your purposes are sublimation, that you're constantly isolating unbearable truths, and this knowledge creates a strange, doubled existence. You're using the mechanisms while knowing you're using them, pretending while knowing you're pretending, committing while knowing commitment is a defense, making meaning while knowing meaning is constructed. This is the specific torture of philosophical consciousness. You can't not see what you've already seen, can't unknow what you've understood, can't return to naive employment of the mechanisms. You're stuck in liminal space, using defenses you know are defenses, believing in meanings you know are invented, caring about things while recognizing that caring is a mechanism. This is the condition Zapffe describes, and there's no escape, no resolution, no way to return to innocence. Some people try to solve this through heightened awareness, through mindfulness, presence, radical acceptance of reality as it is. They try to drop the mechanisms entirely, face existence directly, experience the full weight of consciousness without defense. And sometimes this works. For moments, for periods. You can achieve states of clear seeing, of direct experience without the mediating stories, without the defensive operations. And there's something clean about this. Honest. Real. You're not pretending anymore. Not hiding. Not avoiding. Just experiencing what's actually happening. But it's exhausting. Moment-to-moment awareness of impermanence, of meaninglessness, of mortality, carrying the full weight of consciousness without the mechanisms to distribute the load. Most people can't sustain it. The weight is too much. Eventually, you return to the mechanisms. Start isolating again. Start anchoring again. Start distracting and sublimating. Not because you choose to, but because you have to, because consciousness needs these defenses to remain functional. Others try the opposite. Radical commitment to the mechanisms. Deliberate, conscious choice to anchor even knowing anchors are constructions. To commit to meanings even knowing meanings are invented. To build purposes even knowing purposes are defense mechanisms. This is existentialism. Sartre's bad faith transformed into good faith. You know there's no inherent meaning, so you create meaning and commit to it as if it were inherent. You know your purposes are chosen, so you choose them deliberately and honor them absolutely. You know you're free, so you accept responsibility for everything you are and do. This also works. For some people. For periods. But it requires constant effort, constant recommitment, constant choosing in the face of meaninglessness. And it's tiring. Maintaining belief you know is constructed, defending meanings you know are invented, fighting off the awareness that it's all pretend, all defense, all mechanism. Eventually, the awareness wins. You see through your own commitments. Recognize them as anchoring, as sublimation, as defense against what cannot be defended against. And you're back where you started, knowing too much, seeing too clearly, unable to not see. Zapffe's position is darker than either of these. He doesn't think there's a solution, doesn't believe in transcendence through awareness or meaning through commitment. He thinks consciousness is tragic, that humans are caught in an impossible situation. Too aware to be unconscious, not aware enough to accept meaninglessness without suffering, using mechanisms that work but that don't solve the fundamental problem, and passing this tragedy forward by reproducing, creating new consciousness, new sufferers, new beings who will need the same defenses to survive the same unbearable awareness. He sees birth as tragic, not because life contains suffering, but because life is suffering. Because existence itself is the problem. Because consciousness itself is too much. And creating new consciousness is inflicting this burden on someone who never consented, never asked to exist, never chose this trap. You're born without choosing birth, alive without choosing life, conscious without choosing consciousness. And then you're stuck, dealing with it, using mechanisms that work just well enough to keep you alive, but not well enough to make living obviously worthwhile. And most people never question this, never ask if it's better to have been born or not to have been born, never consider whether creating new life is gift or curse. They just reproduce, pass the burden forward, create new sufferers, and call it love, call it legacy, call it meaning, when it's just the mechanism operating. Will using one generation to create the next, consciousness perpetuating itself through bodies too confused by their own defense mechanisms to recognize what they're doing. This is what makes Zapffe more disturbing than Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer identified will as the problem and offered asceticism as solution. Deny will and suffering ceases. It's difficult, but theoretically possible. Zapffe offers no solution, just description, just the recognition that you're trapped, that the mechanisms are all you have, that they work just well enough to keep you alive, but not well enough to make life good, that you're caught between survival and despair, using defenses that prevent despair, but also prevent you from seeing clearly enough to choose consciously. You're automated, mechanized, running programs you didn't install and can't uninstall, isolation, anchoring, distraction, sublimation, operating constantly, keeping you functional, keeping you alive, keeping you continuing, whether you want to continue or not, whether continuation makes sense or not, whether life is worth living or not. The mechanisms don't care, they just run, and you run with them. Until you don't, until you die, until consciousness finally ceases and the burden is lifted and the mechanisms stop and there's nothing left to defend against nothing. Now, let's look at how this operates culturally, because individuals use these mechanisms, but so do societies. Civilization itself is organized around collective defense against unbearable truths, collective isolation. Culture determines what you're allowed to think about, what topics are acceptable, what questions are appropriate, what thoughts are taboo. You're socialized from birth to avoid certain recognitions, to not ask certain questions, to isolate certain truths. Death isn't discussed honestly. Meaninglessness isn't acknowledged publicly. The randomness of outcomes is denied in favor of just world narratives. You're taught to isolate these recognitions, to treat them as morbid, depressing, unhealthy, instead of seeing them as accurate, true, real. And this socialization works. Most people successfully isolate what they're taught to isolate, never question whether the isolation itself is the problem, never ask what they're avoiding and why. Collective anchoring. Society provides ready-made anchors, national identity, religious membership, cultural belonging, economic participation, family roles. You're given things to commit to, things treated as obviously meaningful, obviously worth dedicating your life to. And most people accept these anchors, make them their own, structure their existence around them, never questioning whether these anchors are inherently meaningful or just collective agreements to treat them as meaningful, whether you're genuinely called to your religion or just anchoring to it because unanchored existence is unbearable, whether your patriotism is reasoned commitment or desperate need for something larger than yourself. society needs you anchored, needs you committed, needs you to treat certain things as mattering absolutely, because unanchored people are unpredictable, uncontrollable, potentially dangerous. So it provides anchors, encourages commitment, rewards dedication, punishes questioning. And most people never see the mechanism, just feel the pull of the anchor, and commit. Collective distraction, entertainment industries, sports, news cycles, social media platforms, consumer culture, technological advancement, all providing constant streams of content, constant engagement, constant stimulation, keeping entire populations distracted, never still, never silent, never confronting the questions that emerge in stillness. And this isn't conspiracy, isn't malicious control, is just capitalism discovering what people need and providing it. People need distraction, will pay for distraction, will organize their lives around having constant access to distraction. So the market provides, endlessly, efficiently, more content than you could consume in a lifetime, more entertainment than you could ever watch, more information than you could ever process, all of it available instantly, all of it designed to engage, to capture attention, to keep you occupied, to keep you not thinking, not feeling, not confronting. And it works. Entire generations growing up never experiencing extended boredom, never sitting with themselves, never facing the questions, always distracted, always engaged, always occupied, until they're not, until the distraction fails, until they're alone in the dark and the thoughts come, and they don't have the tools to deal with them because they've never practiced, never developed the capacity to sit with discomfort, never learned to face what can't be distracted from. Collective sublimation. This is what civilization celebrates most. The artists who express our shared despair, the philosophers who examine our shared confusion, the scientists who understand our shared reality, the activists who fight our shared injustices, the spiritual leaders who provide our shared meanings, all of them taking existential horror and transforming it into something productive, something valuable, something that contributes. And society honors this, funds this, encourages this, because it needs people capable of sublimation, needs people who can take the darkness and make something from it, who can carry consciousness without collapsing, who can function at the edge of the abyss, who can see clearly and still create, still work, still contribute. These people are valuable, not because they've transcended the mechanisms, but because they're employing the mechanisms most effectively, most productively, most usefully. They're demonstrating that the burden can be carried, that consciousness can be functional, that despair can be transformed, and their existence reassures everyone else. If they can do it, maybe you can too. If they can make meaning from meaninglessness, maybe you can too. If they can continue despite seeing clearly, maybe continuation is possible for you too. But what Zapffe understood is that collective mechanisms are just individual mechanisms scaled up. Same isolation, same anchoring, same distraction, same sublimation, just enacted by millions of people simultaneously, coordinated, reinforced, made normal, made invisible. You don't see that your culture is defending against unbearable truths because everyone around you is using the same defenses, participating in the same isolation, committed to the same anchors, engaged in the same distractions, celebrating the same sublimations. It all seems normal, natural, just how things are. You don't recognize it as defense mechanism because defense mechanism is all you've ever known, all anyone has ever known. The waterfish don't know they're swimming in, and questioning it makes you weird, makes you problematic, makes you someone who isn't participating properly, who isn't using the mechanisms correctly, who is breaking the collective agreement to not look at what cannot be looked at. So you're pressured back into line, back into the mechanisms, back into functional participation in the collective defense. Or you're isolated, marginalized, treated as mentally ill, as depressive, as nihilistic, as someone who needs help, needs medication, needs therapy to restore your ability to employ the mechanisms properly. This is why Zapffe's philosophy is dangerous to discuss publicly, why it's not taught widely, why it remains obscure despite being lucid and well argued. Because it reveals the mechanisms, makes them visible, makes them conscious, and once you see them, you can't unsee them, can't return to naive participation, can't use the mechanisms without knowing you're using them. And this knowledge is corrosive, destructive, potentially incapacitating. It's better if people don't know, better if they employ the mechanisms unconsciously, better if they anchor without recognizing anchoring, distract without seeing distraction, sublimate without understanding sublimation. Better if they just live, just function, just participate, without the meta-awareness that makes participation difficult, without the philosophical consciousness that questions whether participation is worth it. But you're here, you're reading this, you've already seen too much, already understand too much, already recognize the mechanisms. So what do? How do you live knowing what Zapffe revealed? Do you reject the mechanisms? Try to live in raw awareness of reality without defense? Most people can't sustain this. The weight is too great, the burden too heavy. Consciousness without defense is crushing, so you'll probably return to the mechanisms. Start isolating again, start anchoring again, start distracting and sublimating again. But now, consciously, with awareness, knowing what you're doing and why. And this doubled consciousness, this knowing participation in your own defense mechanisms, is the specific condition of philosophical awareness. You're using the lies while knowing they're lies. And this isn't hypocrisy, isn't failure, isn't something to feel guilty about, is just the only way to function, the only way to continue, the only way to survive consciousness that shouldn't be survivable. Or maybe you embrace the mechanisms, choose them deliberately, say yes, these are defenses, and I'm going to use them effectively. Going to anchor to things worth anchoring to. Going to sublimate in ways that create value. Going to distract myself with beauty and entertainment that enhance rather than numb. Going to isolate only what truly cannot be integrated. Using the mechanisms consciously, skillfully, with intention. This is possible. Is one response, is taking what's inevitable and making it chosen, making it artistic, making it a practice rather than an unconscious operation. And some people do this successfully. Live consciously within the mechanisms. Use them without being used by them. Create meaning while knowing meaning is created. This is difficult, requires constant awareness, constant choosing, constant reaffirmation, but it's possible, is one way to live, knowing what Zapffe revealed. Or maybe you despair. Maybe you see the mechanisms and reject them and find raw reality unbearable and decide not to continue. This is the dark possibility, the one Zapffe acknowledged but didn't advocate, that seeing clearly might lead to cessation, that consciousness might conclude that existence isn't worth the burden, that the honest response to reality is refusal. And some people do reach this conclusion, do choose to stop, and Zapffe would say this is understandable, coherent, valid response to seeing what others avoid seeing, not mental illness, not irrationality, but clarity. terrible clarity, unbearable clarity, the clarity that recognizes existence is optional and chooses the option of non-existence. Society calls this tragedy, calls this waste, calls this preventable, but Zapffe would ask, is it? Or is it the inevitable outcome of consciousness becoming aware of itself, of awareness recognizing its own burden, of consciousness deciding the cost is too high? These aren't comfortable questions, aren't acceptable questions, aren't questions society allows to be asked seriously, but they're real questions, honest questions, questions that emerge from taking Zapffe's analysis seriously. If this philosophy disturbs you, if you recognize the mechanisms operating in your own mind, if you understand now how you survive what should destroy you, then subscribe to the Hidden Codex. Because we don't avoid the darkness, we explore it. We examine the philosophers who refused to look away, the thinkers who saw what others deny, the brutal honesty that remains true even when it's unbearable. Next time, we'll descend into something even darker, something that makes Zapffe look manageable. Until then, notice the mechanisms. Watch yourself isolating thoughts, anchoring to meanings, distracting from silence, sublimating despair into productivity. Don't judge it. Don't try to stop it. Just notice. Just see. Just recognize what's happening. What's always been happening. What will continue happening. Because that's how you survive. That's how anyone survives. Through lies, through defense, through mechanisms that work just well enough to keep you alive. Not happy, not fulfilled, not satisfied, just alive, just continuing, just functional. And maybe that's enough. Maybe survival is its own justification. Maybe continuing is answer enough. Or maybe it's not. Maybe seeing the mechanisms makes participation impossible, makes continuation questionable, makes existence itself the problem. Zapffe doesn't answer, doesn't tell you what to do, just shows you what's happening, what you're doing, what we're all doing, constantly, unconsciously, necessarily, using 4 lies to sustain what might not be worth sustaining, living on defenses that defend against reality itself, continuing because the mechanisms make continuation possible, not because continuation is obviously worthwhile, but because you're automated, because the mechanisms run, because isolation and anchoring and distraction and sublimation are operating right now. As you read this, as you try not to think about what you've just understood, as you prepare to return to your life and your purposes and your distractions and your commitments, knowing now, seeing now, understanding now that it's all mechanism, all defense, all lies told to yourself by yourself about yourself, to survive yourself, to survive consciousness, to survive the burden of being aware in a universe that gives you no reason to remain aware. That's the truth. That's what Zapffe saw. That's what sustains your life. 4 lies, operating constantly, making existence bearable, making continuation possible, making consciousness survivable, just barely, just enough, just for now, until it's not, until the mechanisms fail, until you see too clearly, until the lies stop working. And then what? Then you find new lies, new mechanisms, new defenses, or you don't. And it ends. That's the choice. The only choice. Lies or cessation, defense or despair, mechanism or recognition. And most people choose mechanism, choose lies, choose continuation through defense, not consciously, not deliberately, but automatically, because that's what consciousness does, defends itself, against itself, using isolation, anchoring, distraction, sublimation, the 4 lies, that sustain your life,